The fog was thick as pitch when Edward and Nathaniel departed the Gentlemen's Club on Lowry Street just before midnight. The road was as silent as the grave, the night just as cold. Along his path the shadows grew darker and taller. They seemed to lurch in the corners as if alive, standing in wait to reach out and grab any passerby. Shapeless forms in the fog caused his mind to imagine horrible beasts listening intently for a heartbeat, a sudden movement, a breath, sitting patiently, waiting, hunting for prey. Then he saw one of the forms move underneath the streetlight. His heart raced as he drew nearer. The shape began to take form, the form of a woman, a beautiful woman in fact, perhaps in her late 20s. She was quite tall with fetching blonde hair slightly askew, wearing a long red velvet dress and holding a handkerchief. It was evident that she had exquisite, if not expensive, taste. She stood there alone, her beauty becoming more noticeable the closer he approached, but he noticed a look of concern that marred her features. "Good evening, ma'am. I don't mean to pry, but you look distressed. Are you in need of any assistance?" he asked her. "Good evening, sir," she replied. "Why, yes, I appear to have lost my way. I was visiting my mother and I lost track of the time. By the time I dispatched, the fog was already moving in. I have been unsuccessful in hailing a carriage at this late hour, and I do not wish to trouble you, but if it would not be too much of an inconvenience, would you please help me to find my way home? I would be forever grateful." "Why, it would be my honor," he said, as he tipped his head and offered her his arm. The woman bowed in reply and took his arm. "Now, where do you live, if I am not imposing?" he asked. "Garland Avenue." "Ah, yes. That's where the cemetery is located, if I recall correctly." "Yes, you are correct," she said. "Well, you are not too far off. It is just down this street on the right, a mere 5 minutes away. I happen to be walking in that direction," he said confidently. "Oh, thank you so much. I don't know how I could ever repay you." "It is nothing, my dear. Shall we take our leave, then?" "Why, yes, that would be splendid," she chirped. They walked in silence, glancing at each other occasionally. Edward turned to her and spoke. "I am not much of a conversationalist, but this silence feels very awkward. So, have you lived in this area long?" "Yes," she replied, "all my life, and I too must confess that I am not one for idle chatter." "I see. Perhaps a formal introduction is in order, so as not to feel so uncomfortable then," he said as they paused a moment. "Please allow me to introduce myself. I am Edward Nathaniel, proprietor of Nathaniel's Mourning Warehouse. We cater to all needs of mourning." "Pleased to meet you, Edward. I am Beatrice Davies." "The pleasure is all mine," he said, bowing his head. "With the formalities out of the way, shall we continue on our little journey?" "Why, yes," she replied. "The hour is getting late, and I feel quite exhausted." "Let us be off then," he said as they began to stroll again. "I have also lived here for many years. I've always been fascinated by the exquisite architecture in this neighborhood," Edward said as they turned the corner, with the cemetery in sight. "Look, there, for example, at the top of the church," Edward noted as he looked across the street pointing to a feature. "Those gargoyles, did you know that they are not only decorative, but also serve a purpose?" He suddenly felt alone. He looked back to Beatrice, but she had vanished without a trace, not a farewell or even a thank you. He looked around but did not see her anywhere. He saw that he was standing in front of the cemetery gates. He decided to investigate inside, although he could not assume why she would, if at all, go into the cemetery, especially at this hour being so close to her home if she was exhausted as she claimed to be. As he entered, he spied her handkerchief lying on the ground before an old mausoleum. Its outer walls were discolored with age. Moss and ivy covered the roof and columns. He walked up to the marble tomb in silence out of respect for the dead, and as so not to draw any attention. He observed the handkerchief Beatrice was holding, As he picked it up, he noticed the initials BD embroidered within its fabrics. He then looked up, returning his attention to the mausoleum. He froze in horror. There above the door, carved into its rigid structure, read, Beatrice Davies, born 1834, died 1852.